Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to say a few words about the three kinds of delusions that most people are living under as long as we are not enlightened, as long as we don't have insight into the reality as it is. And from there we can say, well, the opposite of those illusions, that would be the insights into the three characteristics of existence, which is part and parcel of the insight or vipassana that one gets through the practice of mindfulness, the satipatthana bhavana, or the meditation on the development of mindfulness of body, feelings and mind. So generally speaking, most people seem to think that in this world things are permanent, or as permanent as it can be, or they hope that things are permanent. And whereas the reality is actually that everything is impermanent and changing all the time. Even in science you find that when you really look at matter, for instance, under an electronic microscope, then you start to see the, maybe come a little bit further forward. Yes. So when you look at matter under a microscope, a very powerful electronic microscope, you start to see that what we think is matter. Now, for instance, diamonds are forever, they say, right? But even if you look at a diamond under the microscope, you find that there's a lot of space in between the particles. And when you go subatomically, some people can't find the way maybe. And when you then look subatomically, you find that there's actually just energy and not really matter. So that comes very close to what the Buddha says, that the ultimate reality is really empty of matter. So the ultimate reality of matter that is that there's no matter. But then of course we have to look with the Buddha's wisdom also at the different levels of reality. You see, we have this general relative reality that we have to deal with in daily life, where we have concepts and things around us, and this me and mine, yours, and so on. And that is what we call sammutti satya in the Pali language, the relative reality. And then there is the absolute reality, the things as they really are, that is called the Paramartha Satya, the higher truth. So in that way, we can say that as long as we are deluded, that is not enlightened, we do identify more with that relative reality, and we don't know the other side or the absolute reality yet. So the idea or the aim, in a way, of one of the aims of vipassana meditation is to get to know that other absolute reality for oneself, not as a concept but as an experience. And that will actually have a very beneficial effect on our minds, in the sense that it will loosen up these delusions that we have. So to just sum up the three delusions I just mentioned, the first one, that we think things and people and situations are permanent, which they aren't. The other delusion is we also tend to think that there's real happiness in these relative things. And of course there is happiness, there's also unhappiness, but even the happiness that we derive from the worldly things that we can see, hear, smell, taste, touch and think, they are not absolutely giving us the, let's say, lasting happiness or permanent happiness, because they're all conditioned. As long as we see beautiful things, we feel happy. As long as we hear beautiful sounds, we feel happy. And smelling, tasting, touching and thinking, the same for that. But when you really see that that happiness is conditioned by the objects that we perceive, and when that object is gone, that happiness is also gone, and then we try to extend it, so we hope for more. Basically, that is where our greed and our thirst, our craving comes from, hoping for more pleasant experiences, and trying to avoid the unpleasant experience. That is basically what human beings and basically all beings seem to be doing. We want happiness, we try to avoid unhappiness. But we tend to confuse the temporary happiness with, the real happiness with temporary happiness. So we always go for the temporary things, and then we find, oh, is that all? It's gone before you know it. And then we sort of think back with longing, I wish it would be there, or something, I hope I have more of this. And that is where the craving starts to work in our minds. And that is also where the conflict is between what is and what we want. And you cannot always get what you want, but you get what you need. That's what the Beatles said anyway, those days. And that seems to be the law of karma also, that you do get what you need, but you can't always get what you want. So there is a kind of conflict between the wanting and the fact that what is. So that is one thing which we call a cause of dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness, or conflict, or suffering. And then the third delusion is sometimes maybe the most difficult one. That is the delusion that there is a real self, an abiding, unchanging, everlasting core or soul or self in ourselves. Now, as Buddhists, we sort of go proud on saying there's no self in Buddhism. We don't have a self. But some people are very proud and selfish about it with saying that. Now we have to understand what the Buddha said when he mentioned the word anatta in Pali language, which of course is not related to Buddhism but more to Hindi and Sanskrit. Anatta means non-self, or rather not having an eternal, everlasting, unchanging soul in itself. So what did the Buddha mean by that? So atta would be self, anatta is non-self. Now the word atta is used by the Buddha also. He says you yourself are responsible for your actions. You create your own karma. You do good, you do bad, you receive the results of your karma. And in that way there is a self who is doing, who is experiencing, who is intending, and so on, who is thinking and receiving the good and bad results of previous karma, even from past lives. In that sense, there is a stream of consciousness which continues and has a certain identity of itself. And that is why we say, for instance, when we remember something from when we were very young, that is me. When you see a picture of yourself as a baby, that's me. But that body has completely changed over the years, the mind also has changed, but still there is a line of identity. So that's why we can say that is a relative self. But there's no absolute, unchanging, everlasting core in it. So that is what the Buddha actually denied, that eternal core. And that is why he says, an-atman. Now in Hinduism, which is sort of the background of the Buddha's time, and even now, Atman is a very major thing in their teachings. They say, well, okay, your body is changing, your feelings are changing, your intentions are changing, your thoughts are changing, the content of your consciousness is changing, but there is something which you really are. That is the Hindu teaching. They say, thou art that, tattvam asi. And if I'm not this, then I hope to be that. And that is also eternal, unchanging, everlasting. It's like God, and I am God. Thou art that. That is in the Hindu view, the kind of philosophy or the view of self. So there's a self with a small self, and there's a self with a capital S. Capital S. But in Buddhism, the Buddha said, no, there is something which is eternal and unconditioned, which we call nirvana, but that is not yourself. That doesn't belong to you. That is just the unconditioned, which we can realize, but you should not identify with it as me, mine, my own, or myself, or my soul. So that is quite a major difference. I think that's the main difference between Hindu teachings and Buddhist teachings. And I think the Buddha actually tried to show that there is no substance or eternal self in all this in order to get rid of our craving and our attachment. Because if we say, I am that, or you are that, then perhaps you start identifying with that very subtle, unconditioned, maybe God or the Absolute, and that in itself could become a reason or a cause for rebirth.